So in order to create functions, you need to do two things. One is to define a function. By defining a function, what it means is I just create this box, let's say, and I know it actually does calculate the square of a number, but it doesn't do anything. It's just sitting there, right? And the other one is execute function. What it means is in order to utilize or use this function, you have to give it some input, right? So we already know what function we have, which is square. By execution of the function, we need to give it some input. In this case, let's say if we give it 2, the output of this function would be 4. So we are making use of this function by giving it an input, and it gives us back the output. So this is called execution of the function. This is actually defining the function. It just creates it. It's not using it. Similarly, in our daily lives, one example of function could be that if you go and buy a bicycle for yourself, right? You bring the bicycle home. It's similar to defining a function, right? So you have defined the function in this case by buying the bicycle, right? But it's not doing anything. Now, once you go ahead and ride the bicycle, you have to pedal, which is the input, and the output is it actually moves and takes you from one place to another place. So pedal is the input and the bicycle moves is the output, right? So it's a transportation function. It provides some kind of it's a form of transportation. When you buy the bicycle, you actually define the function. When you give it some pedaling, you give it the input, and as an output, it actually moves. So that's the execution of the function. In a programming language, a function can be defined as follows. Each function has a signature, and it has a body, and followed by it has a return. Okay, so this is the function signature. So in most programming languages, a signature consists of a return type. It has a name, and then in parentheses, it has a list of parameters. And these parameters are actually the input to the function. You can have 0 parameters, 1 parameter, 2 parameter, or 3 parameters, and so forth. Return type tells us the output of the function, what type of output it gives. Then the body actually is a set of statements which defines the task for the function. So body could be 1 statement, 2 statements, or any number of statements which are required to have the function do its job. In most programming languages, return is the keyword used which can return the value to the caller of this function, right? So if I'm a client of this function, I call this function, okay? And then in return, I get back whatever value is returned by this keyword return, okay? Let's dive a little bit deeper into parameters. Now, as I mentioned, we have 1 or more parameters defined here. Usually a parameter is defined in most programming languages by a type of the parameter and the name of the parameter, okay? And if you have multiple parameters, they are separated by comma. For another parameter, you will have a type, you will have a name, and so forth, okay? All comma separated. So that's how the function actually is defined. Let's take an example. Let's create a square function as we have studied. So the square function actually returns a type number or any numeric type. Its name could be square, and its parameters type is also a number, and the value is, let's just call it a variable name input. Okay. Now the body of this function is very simple in our case. Whatever input we get, let's just say it stores the result into a variable. It just takes this input, multiplies it by itself of that number and stores the result here. Now whoever calls this function is obviously interested in looking at the squared value. So we say return result. Whatever result we have here, we return it to the caller. So the return type is also a number, right? In this case, because when you multiply a number with a number, it produces another number. So the return type is a number. This is an example of defining a very simple function. Okay. Now in Python, things are a little bit different. In Python, you don't need to define the return type. It automatically figures it out. If we were to define the same function in Python, we would just say the keyword def here to tell it it's a function. We will give it the name. And also we don't need to define this type of the parameter here also. However, since we don't have the type information in Python, the client of the function have to be careful to pass it the number, because if you don't pass it the number, this statement might throw an error if it's not applicable to the numbers, and your program will fail. So you have to do some additional due diligence in case of Python because it doesn't have the type information. Similarly, you can just return the result and you don't have to define the type of the result.